Hey folks, before the video starts, I want to say big thank you for the feedback you gave me in the last video. Again, I will be short and say, as every other video, to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment down below, helping me to give proof to YouTube that all of you who follow this channel so far are real people who watch my videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. I found a limited edition Nike shoe on a dark web auction. The sole had bloodstains, and the seller said it was worn during a ritual. Alright, so before anyone jumps in calling me stupid, let me explain. I know the dark web is a shady place. I wasn't looking for anything illegal, I swear. It all started because my buddy Trevor told me about these secret sneaker auctions on the dark web. I'm a sneakerhead, and the thought of snagging some crazy rare kicks that no one else has. Yeah, it sounded cool at the time. Trevor wasn't exactly the most trustworthy guy, but he's the kind of friend you keep around because he always has some wild story. He was the one who convinced me to try bidding on the dark web. Dude, he said, while munching on a Big Mac at McDonald's, people sell stuff there that never even makes it to regular auctions. Prototypes, unreleased samples, sometimes custom designs from, like, underground artists. He claimed he once saw a pair of Yeezys with glow-in-the-dark stitching that Adidas cancelled for being too weird. I wasn't buying all of Trevor's hype, but I was curious. So, one night, after a long shift at Starbucks, I went home, grabbed my laptop, and started Googling how to access the dark web. Turns out, it's not as hard as people think. Download a browser, follow a few tutorials, and boom, you're there. At first, I just browsed around. Most of the sites looked sketchy as hell. Lots of black backgrounds with red text, poorly designed, like something out of a 90s hacker movie. I finally found a marketplace Trevor mentioned, Hidden Vault Auctions. It was a forum-style site, mostly for collectibles, vintage watches, rare coins, weird paintings. But then I saw it, a listing titled Nike Prototype Sneaker, Never Released, Dark History, in all caps. The listing had one picture. The sneaker looked like a regular Air Force One, but with a strange, almost tribal design etched into the sole. The color was a deep crimson red with black accents, like something Nike might have designed for Halloween. It looked worn, like someone had actually used it. What caught my attention, though, was the description. It said, "This is a one-of-a-kind Nike prototype, designed for a private client, worn during a ceremony. History is embedded in the sole." Weird, right? But here's the thing. The starting bid was only $100. For a rare sneaker, that's nothing. I figured it was some edgy marketing ploy to make the shoe seem cooler. I was about to scroll past, but then I saw the bid history. Someone had already bid $500. Now, I'm not one to fall for FOMO, but my curiosity got the better of me. What kind of person bids $500 for a shoe with such a cryptic description? And what ceremony was the seller talking about? I created an account, using a fake name, obviously, and placed a bid. $510. I honestly didn't think I'd win. I assumed some rich collector would swoop in with a crazy offer. But 3 days later, I got an email saying I'd won. When the email hit my inbox, I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, feeling equal parts thrilled and uneasy. I mean, I'd won the auction, but now I had to actually deal with getting this thing delivered. I followed the seller's instructions to pay using cryptocurrency, which was already sketchy because I had no idea how Bitcoin worked. I watched a YouTube tutorial, stumbled through the process, and eventually sent over the payment. The seller replied almost immediately with a message that made my stomach drop. Your payment is confirmed. Shipment in progress. Do not share your address with others for your own safety. Weird phrasing, right? It sounded more like a threat than advice. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe they were just trying to sound mysterious to fit the vibe of the auction. Whatever. I figured I'd wait a few days for the package, but it actually arrived faster than expected. 2 days later, to be exact. The delivery itself was unsettling. It didn't come via FedEx or USPS, but through some random, unmarked van that pulled up to my apartment at 11:30 p.m. Yeah, p.m. The guy who brought it wasn't wearing any kind of uniform, just a black hoodie with the hood pulled up. He didn't even ring the bell. I only knew he was there because I happened to glance out my window and saw someone standing at my door, holding a package. When I opened the door, he handed me the box without saying a word. I tried to thank him, but he just walked off, disappearing into the night. No receipt, no signature required, nothing. The box itself was plain brown, sealed with what looked like old duct tape. There was no shipping label, just my name written in Sharpie across the top. At this point, I should have known to just toss the thing in the trash. But come on, I paid over $500 for this. Curiosity killed the cat, right? Or maybe the cat just really wanted limited edition sneakers. I took the box to my kitchen table and grabbed a knife to cut through the tape. The first thing that hit me when I opened it was the smell. It wasn't like a used shoe smell. It was metallic, almost like the scent of rust. I pulled out a layer of crumpled newspaper and uncovered the shoe. There it was, just like in the photo. A deep crimson Air Force One with black tribal designs etched into the sole. The laces were frayed, like they'd been tied and untied 1,000 times. The leather was scuffed, and the sole had these dark, reddish stains that looked, well, I convinced myself it was just dirt. What else could it be? But then I noticed something the photo hadn't shown. Inside the shoe, written in tiny, messy handwriting on the insole, were the words, "Sacrifice binds the wearer." I swear to God, I laughed when I saw it. It was so over the top, so cliché. Someone clearly thought they were being edgy. Still, there was something about the way the words were scratched into the material. It didn't look like it was done with a Sharpie or pen. It looked like someone had carved the letters with a needle or knife. At this point, I had two choices: chalk it up to some weird art project, or freak myself out by digging deeper. Guess which one I picked? I spent the next hour Googling every combination of words I could think of. Nike prototype ritual shoe, sacrificial sneakers, tribal soul designs. Nothing came up. No forum posts, no sneaker collector blogs, no urban legends. It was like this thing didn't exist outside of that auction site. Then I flipped the shoe over to examine the sole more closely. That's when I noticed the designs weren't just random. They were symbols, and they looked eerily similar to some occult stuff I'd seen in a documentary about secret societies. There were spirals, triangles, and what looked like a human eye. One symbol, in particular, stood out. A circle with 3 jagged lines slashing through it. I tried to convince myself it was just an edgy aesthetic, but something about it made my skin crawl. I was so caught up examining the shoe that I didn't notice my phone buzzing on the table. It wasn't until the 3rd buzz that I snapped out of it and checked the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Do not wear the shoe. Do not keep it in your home. Return it to where it came from. I froze. I didn't even remember giving out my phone number during the auction. How did they know? I texted back, trying to sound casual. Who is this? No response. Now, I'd like to say I did the smart thing and threw the shoe away, but I didn't. It was late, and I was exhausted. I shoved the shoe back in the box, taped it shut, and stuck it in the corner of my closet. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, I had the worst sleep of my life. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt watched. I kept waking up every hour, heart racing, with this strange pressure in my chest. At one point, I swear I heard footsteps in my apartment. I live alone, so that wasn't exactly comforting. I grabbed a baseball bat and checked every room, but nothing was out of place. When I finally drifted off again, I had the most vivid, unsettling dream. I was in a dark forest, barefoot, with something chasing me. I couldn't see it, but I could hear its breathing, raspy and wet, like it had water in its lungs. The ground was wet and cold, and every step I took left red footprints behind me. When I looked down, I realized I was wearing the shoe. Just one, on my left foot. The blood on the sole wasn't dirtied by the mud. It looked fresh, dripping. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. But the worst part, when I got up to get a glass of water, I noticed something strange. There was a single red footprint on my bedroom floor. The footprint on my floor wasn't just red. It had a texture to it, like someone had pressed something wet and sticky into the wood. At first, I thought maybe I'd stepped on something in the kitchen during my late-night water run. But no, the kitchen was spotless. My whole apartment was, actually. I'm kind of a neat freak. So, where the hell did it come from? I crouched down, trying to get a closer look. The print was shaped like the sole of a shoe, and it had those same strange tribal patterns. It didn't take a genius to figure out it matched the one in my closet. But how? I hadn't worn it, let alone taken it out of the box. My first instinct was to grab the box and double-check. I turned on every light in my apartment because I wasn't about to wander around in the dark, and opened my closet. The box was exactly where I'd left it, taped shut. It looked undisturbed, but when I picked it up, it felt lighter. That sinking feeling you get when you know something's wrong. Yeah, multiply that by 10. My hands were shaking as I tore the tape off and opened the box. The crumpled newspaper was still inside, but the shoe was gone. Gone. I just stared at the empty box, my brain doing backflips trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe I'd misplaced it. No, that didn't make sense. Maybe someone broke in and took it, but nothing else in my apartment was missing, and my front door was locked, deadbolt and all. And then I heard it. A faint thud, thud, thud sound, like someone pacing in another room. The sound was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze, my eyes locked on the open closet. I didn't want to move. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. After what felt like an eternity, I worked up the courage to peek out of my bedroom. The hallway was empty, but the sound hadn't stopped. It was quieter now, softer, like it was farther away. And then I realized where it was coming from. The living room. I crept down the hall, bat in hand, trying to keep my breathing steady. When I reached the living room, I flipped the light switch, and nothing happened. The bulb was dead. Of course, I had to rely on the faint glow of the streetlight streaming through the window. That's when I saw it. The shoe. It was sitting in the middle of the coffee table, perfectly upright, like someone had placed it there intentionally. The bloodstains on the sole were darker now, almost black, and there was something smeared on the table underneath it. When I got closer, I saw that it wasn't just a random stain. It was a symbol, the same circle with jagged lines I'd seen on the bottom of the shoe. This was no coincidence. Someone, or something, was messing with me. I grabbed the shoe and threw it back in the box, wrapping it in the newspaper like I was trying to suffocate it. My brain was screaming at me to get it out of my apartment, but where would I take it? It's not like I could just toss it in a dumpster and call it a day. So, I did the next best thing. I shoved the box in the trunk of my car and drove. I ended up at a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town, one of those creepy, barely lit places where the clerk is half asleep and the coffee tastes like motor oil. I parked in the farthest corner of the lot, away from the cameras, and grabbed the box. My plan was simple: dump it in one of the industrial-sized trash bins behind the station and leave. But when I got out of the car, the air felt wrong. It was heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. The streetlights around the gas station were flickering, and I swear the shadows were moving, not like trees swaying in the wind, more like something was walking just out of sight. I hurried to the dumpster, but when I lifted the lid, I froze. The inside wasn't empty. It was filled with dozens of boxes, all identical to mine. Same size, same plain brown cardboard, same Sharpie scrawl across the top. I backed away, heart pounding, and that's when I heard it again. Thud, thud, thud. This time, it wasn't faint. It was loud, like someone stomping toward me. I spun around, expecting to see, I don't know, a person, but there was no one there. Just the sound, getting closer. Without thinking, I dropped the box and bolted back to my car. I didn't even bother closing the trunk. I just peeled out of the parking lot and didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town. When I finally got home, it was almost sunrise. I was exhausted, but there was no way I was sleeping. I checked every lock, closed every curtain, and sat in my kitchen with all the lights on, trying to convince myself this was all just in my head. Maybe I'd been watching too many horror videos on YouTube or reading too many Reddit threads. Yeah, that had to be it. But then my phone buzzed. It was another text from that unknown number. The ritual is incomplete. Return the shoe, or suffer the consequences. I dropped my phone like it was on fire. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it back up. When I finally did, I noticed something else. Attached to the text was a photo. It was a picture of my apartment building, taken from the parking lot. For a solid 30 seconds, I just stared at the photo on my phone, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe it wasn't even my building. But the more I looked, the more my stomach churned. The photo wasn't just of my apartment. It was from the exact angle someone would see if they were standing in the lot right now. I didn't even think about calling the police. What was I going to say? Hey, someone's stalking me because I bought a cursed shoe on the dark web. They'd either laugh or send me for a psych eval. My next thought was to call Trevor. After all, he was the one who got me into this mess. But when I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. Figures. I didn't feel safe staying in my apartment, but I didn't know where else to go. The sun was rising now, casting an eerie orange glow through my blinds. Normally I'd find daylight comforting, but this time it only made the shadows in the corners of my room seem darker. And then I heard it. It was subtle at first, like a faint scratching sound. I froze, listening intently. It was coming from the living room. Slowly, I crept down the hallway, gripping the bat I'd left leaning against the wall. The scratching got louder, more frantic, like something or someone was trying to claw its way through the wall. When I stepped into the living room, the sound stopped. The room was exactly how I'd left it, except for one thing: the box. The same box I dumped behind the gas station hours earlier was now sitting in the middle of my coffee table, perfectly intact. My heart dropped. There was no way this was happening. I didn't even touch it this time. I just stood there, staring at it, like it was a bomb about to go off. And then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The text was short, just 2 words. It's time. Before I could even process what that meant, my TV turned on by itself. It wasn't on any channel, just static. But buried in the static, I could make out shapes, like something was moving just beyond the screen. And then I saw it, the shoe. It was there, in the static, spinning slowly, like it was being displayed on a pedestal. A voice crackled through the speakers, low and distorted, but clear enough to make out the words. The ritual requires blood. I backed away, heart pounding, but the TV turned off just as suddenly as it had turned on. The apartment went dead silent. I grabbed the box, my hands trembling, and threw it as hard as I could against the wall. The sound it made when it hit wasn't what I expected. It didn't sound like cardboard. It was heavier, like metal hitting wood. The box broke open on impact, spilling its contents across the floor. The shoe was there, of course, but so was something else. A small leather pouch, tied shut with a string. I hesitated, then picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. When I untied the string and opened it, a metallic smell hit me, stronger than before. Inside was a tiny vial filled with a thick, dark liquid. Blood. There was no mistaking it. The vial had a tag attached to it, written in the same scratchy handwriting as the words inside the shoe. An offering for passage. I dropped it like it burned me. None of this made any sense. I didn't sign up for a cult initiation. I just wanted a stupid pair of sneakers. But as I stared at the broken box and its contents, I realized there was no going back. Whoever or whatever was behind this wasn't going to stop. I knew what I had to do, but it felt insane even thinking about it. I needed to finish the ritual. I spent the next hour frantically Googling everything I could about rituals, sacrifices, and occult symbols. I ended up on forums I probably shouldn't have been on, reading posts from people who claimed to have survived similar experiences. One thread caught my attention, written by someone who called themselves Witness 333. Their post was short but chilling. If you've received the shoe, it's already too late. Follow the instructions, complete the ritual, or they'll come for you. The replies were even worse. Stories of people who ignored the warnings, only to have their lives fall apart in ways that sounded too horrible to be real. One guy claimed he was haunted by faceless figures who showed up in mirrors. Another said his entire family disappeared overnight. And then there were the photos, blurry, grainy images of shoes left in strange places, surrounded by symbols carved into the ground. I couldn't believe I was seriously considering this, but what choice did I have? If it was a scam, it was the most elaborate one I'd ever seen. And if it wasn't, well, I didn't want to find out what they would do if I refused. The instructions were vague at best. An offering for passage. Blood must bind the path. Return to the source. Return to the source. What did that even mean? Was it the gas station, the auction site, the cellar? I racked my brain, and then it hit me. The address. The one place I hadn't thought about. When I'd paid for the shoe, the seller had included a return address on the receipt. It wasn't a full address, just a town, Elkwood, Pennsylvania. A tiny dot on the map I'd never heard of. I packed a bag, grabbed the shoe and the pouch, and hit the road. The drive to Elkwood was about 6 hours, but it felt like days. The entire time, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. The closer I got to the town, the more isolated the roads became. No streetlights, no other cars, just endless stretches of dark forest. By the time I reached Elkwood, it was almost midnight. The place looked abandoned. Most of the houses were boarded up, and the streetlights flickered like they hadn't been maintained in years. I parked in front of the only building that still had its lights on, a run-down church with a cracked, stained glass window. This had to be it. I stepped inside, clutching the shoe and the pouch like they were my lifelines. The interior was just as creepy as the outside. Peeling paint, broken pews, and a single altar at the front of the room. Behind the altar was a symbol carved into the wall, the same circle with jagged lines. Before I could take another step, the door slammed shut behind me, and the room went pitch black. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the empty church, and for a second, all I could hear was my own breathing, shallow, rapid, and panicked. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead, no matter how many times I pressed the button. Figures. The dim light from the cracked, stained glass was gone, leaving me in complete darkness. And then I heard it, a low, guttural hum, resonating from the walls, like the building itself was alive. The air grew colder, and I felt an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. I clutched the shoe and the pouch tighter, my fingers trembling. The hum grew louder, evolving into a chant. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, whispering words I couldn't understand. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the space with an unnatural energy. I turned toward where I thought the altar was and started walking, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. As I got closer, the whispers shifted into something more distinct. Words, names, my name. Evan. I froze. The voices were clearer now, overlapping in a haunting symphony, each one speaking my name in a different tone. Some were soft and pleading, others were harsh and accusatory. It was like the voices knew me, knew everything about me, my regrets, my fears, my darkest thoughts. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in quicksand. The altar was only a few feet away now, illuminated by a faint red glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere. On the surface of the altar was a shallow stone basin, cracked and worn, but still intact. Carved into its rim was the same jagged circle symbol that had haunted me from the start. The glow pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. I didn't want to touch it, but the whispers wouldn't stop, growing louder and more insistent. I realized they weren't just calling my name anymore. They were giving me instructions, telling me what to do. Place the offering. My hand moved on its own, as if some unseen force was guiding me. I set the shoe on the altar, its crimson leather gleaming in the eerie light. The whispers quieted, replaced by an oppressive silence. For a moment, nothing happened, and I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then the basin began to fill. The liquid wasn't coming from a pipe or a hidden mechanism. It was just appearing, welling up from the cracks in the stone. It was thick and dark, the same shade as the blood in the vial I'd found. The metallic scent hit me like a punch to the face, making my stomach churn. The whispers returned, louder this time, demanding. The blood binds the path. Complete the ritual. I didn't need them to spell it out for me. The pouch, the vial, my own blood, if necessary. I knew what they wanted, but could I really go through with it? This wasn't some game. This was real. Too real. I tried to back away, but the air around me felt solid, like invisible walls were closing in. The glow from the altar grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. The whispers turned into screams, angry and desperate, a cacophony of voices urging me forward. Do it! With shaking hands, I opened the pouch and pulled out the vial. The glass was cold against my fingers, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I tipped it over, letting the thick, dark liquid drip into the basin. The moment the first drop hit, the entire room shook. The glow from the altar flared, blinding me, and the whispers stopped mid-sentence. In the silence, a single sound emerged, a deep, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something else entirely. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes as the glow intensified. When it finally dimmed, the basin was empty, the blood gone. The shoe was still there, but it had changed. The red leather was now jet black, and the tribal patterns had shifted, forming a new symbol I didn't recognize. The sole, once scuffed and bloodstained, now looked pristine, polished and gleaming, as if it had never been worn. And then I felt it. A presence. I turned, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the far end of the room, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was obscured by darkness, but its eyes burned like embers, two pinpricks of fire that seemed to pierce straight through me. The whispers returned, softer now, almost reverent. It is done. The path is open. The figure began to move, gliding toward me without making a sound. My body refused to cooperate, frozen in place as it came closer. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there like an idiot. But all I could do was watch as it reached the altar and placed a hand, if you could call it a hand, on the shoe. The moment it touched the shoe, the air shifted, the oppressive weight lifted, and the room seemed to expand, the walls stretching infinitely outward. The figure turned to me, its fiery eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time, I heard its voice. It wasn't a whisper or a growl. It was calm, almost gentle, but filled with an authority that made my bones vibrate. The debt is paid. You may leave. And just like that, it was gone. I don't remember leaving the church. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car, the sun rising over the horizon. The box was gone, along with the shoe and the pouch. All that remained was a single piece of paper sitting on the passenger seat. Scrawled in that same scratchy handwriting were 3 words, "Never come back." I drove home in silence, my mind racing. It's been a week since that night, and I haven't told anyone what happened. The texts stopped, the nightmares faded, but every now and then I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that lingers too long, a flash of red where there shouldn't be. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear it. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of footsteps, pacing just outside my door. I found a dark web forum selling exclusive McDonald's Happy Meal toys. The one I bought came with a warning: don't open it after midnight. Okay, so let me start by saying I'm not one of those conspiracy theory nuts or deep web junkies. I'm just a regular guy, bored out of my mind one weekend, with way too much curiosity for my own good. I'd just finished binge watching a series on Netflix. Don't even ask which one. I barely remember. And for some reason, I got it into my head to poke around on the dark web. Not for anything illegal, just to see what was out there. Now, before you start judging me, I didn't just dive in unprepared. I'd watched enough YouTube videos with titles like "I spent 24 hours on the dark web and regretted it" to know the basics. VPN? Check. Tor browser? Check. Common sense? Debatable. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just hopping from one sketchy forum to the next, reading all the insane stuff people posted. There were the usual suspects: weird marketplaces selling counterfeit designer stuff, hacker groups flexing their exploits, and of course, those creepy threads where people claim to sell haunted dolls or cursed objects. I didn't believe in any of it, but it was fun to read. Then I came across a thread titled "Rare McDonald's Happy Meal Collectibles for the True Collector." I don't even know why I clicked on it. I guess the combination of nostalgia and how totally random it was piqued my interest. The post was by a user called Golden Archangel, and it was strange. The layout was basic, but the pictures caught my attention immediately. They were low res and blurry, like they'd been taken with an old flip phone, but they showed Happy Meal toys in plastic bags, like the kind you'd see at a McDonald's circa 1995. But these weren't the usual toys. There was something unsettling about them. One looked like a normal Ronald McDonald figurine, but his grin was stretched too wide, almost Joker-like. Another showed a Hamburglar toy, except his hands were chained together like he was being arrested. And then there was the most disturbing one, a clown figurine labeled Midnight Buddy. The Midnight Buddy toy looked like Ronald McDonald, but off. Its face was pale, almost ghostly, with deep-set glassy eyes that seemed to stare right into the camera. Its red jumpsuit was a darker shade than usual, almost blood-like, and its shoes were scuffed and dirty. Beneath the pictures was a short message: "Rare McDonald's toys for true fans. Limited edition. Not responsible for side effects. Midnight Buddy available now. Warning applies." At first, I thought it was some elaborate prank. Maybe some bored collector trying to make a quick buck off fake horror stories. But then I scrolled through the comments, and they were serious. People were raving about how they'd ordered from this seller before, calling the toys authentic and rare beyond belief. One guy even claimed the Midnight Buddy toy was too dangerous and advised against buying it. Naturally, that only made me more curious. The deal. I don't know what possessed me to reach out to the seller. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that this was all some elaborate joke. I shot Golden Archangel a private message. "Hey, I'm interested in the Midnight Buddy toy. Is it still available?" To my surprise, they replied within minutes. The message was short and to the point. Midnight Buddy is 0.005 Bitcoin. Payment upfront. Shipping included. Warning: do not open after midnight. For those who don't know, 0.005 Bitcoin is around $150. It was way more than I'd ever spent on a stupid novelty item, but I couldn't resist. I told myself it'd make a funny story for TikTok or Reddit. Hey, I bought a cursed McDonald's toy off the dark web. Guess I'm haunted now. That kind of thing. I transferred the Bitcoin through a secure wallet, of course, and waited for a response. A few minutes later, I got a confirmation message. Order confirmed. Shipping in 5 to 7 business days. No returns. Midnight Buddy comes with conditions. Do not open after midnight. Thank you for your purchase. The message ended with a tracking number. I couldn't believe it was legit. I half expected the whole thing to be a scam, but nope. The package was on its way. The wait for the next week, I kept checking the tracking updates like a kid waiting for Christmas. The package started in Switzerland, of all places, and made its way across the Atlantic. Every time I checked, I felt this weird mix of excitement and dread. What if it was just some random junk? Or worse, what if it actually was cursed? I told a couple of friends about it, and they all thought I was crazy. My buddy Kevin said, "Dude, you're gonna end up on one of those creepy found footage YouTube channels." Another friend, Rachel, just rolled her eyes and told me to stop wasting money. But deep down, I was hooked. I kept imagining what the toy would look like in person, whether it would be as creepy as the pictures. Part of me hoped it was just a stupid plastic figure I could laugh about later. Another part, maybe a bigger part, hoped it wasn't. The package finally arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. It came in this small brown box with no return address, no branding, nothing. Just a plain cardboard box sealed with packing tape. I brought it inside, my heart racing for no reason. I opened it carefully, half expecting glitter or a jump scare prank. But nope. It was just a small Ziploc bag with the Midnight Buddy toy inside and a folded piece of paper. The toy was even creepier in person. It was about 3 inches tall, made of plastic, but its glassy eyes caught the light in a way that made them look alive. Its face was blank, almost emotionless, but those eyes, they gave me the chills. The note was short and ominous. Do not open after midnight. Failure to comply is on you. I laughed. It had to be a joke, right? Some edgy collector trying to add a layer of mystery to his weird toys. But still, there was this little voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if it's not? Of course, I didn't listen. I placed the Midnight Buddy toy on my desk, right next to my monitor. It wasn't like I believed anything bad was going to happen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those glassy eyes were watching me. Every time I glanced at it, I swore the way the light hit its eyes made it look aware. But it was just a toy. Plastic and glass, nothing more. Still, the note that came with it stuck in my head. Do not open after midnight. What did that even mean? Was it referring to the plastic bag it came in? Or was it some kind of metaphorical warning, like a twisted version of Gremlins? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to back down from testing it. That's just how my brain works. Tell me not to do something, and I immediately want to do it. I spent the rest of the day pretending the toy didn't exist, working on some freelance graphic design projects, and binging random YouTube videos in the background. Every now and then, though, I caught myself glancing at the Midnight Buddy. I even picked it up once, rolling it around in my hands. The texture was smooth, but cold, like it had just come out of the fridge. Weird, but not creepy enough to scare me off. Around 11 p.m., I started getting ready for bed. My apartment was dead silent, except for the occasional sound of my upstairs neighbor walking around. I live alone in a one-bedroom place, so it's usually pretty quiet, which is great for work, but terrible when you're trying not to overthink something. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't resist one last look at the toy. It was still sitting on my desk, motionless, just like it had been all day. But as I stared at it from across the room, I got this weird feeling, like I wasn't alone. You know that sensation when someone's standing right behind you, even though you're alone? That's what it felt like. I shook it off. It was just the result of a long day and too much caffeine. The first noise. I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m., not because of a bad dream or because I had to pee, but because of a noise. It was faint, barely loud enough to register, but it was there. A soft tapping sound, like someone drumming their fingers against glass. At first, I thought it was the radiator acting up again. My apartment's heating system is ancient, and it loves to make creepy noises at night. But as I lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling, I realized the tapping wasn't coming from the radiator. It was coming from my desk, the Midnight Buddy toy. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe something in the apartment had shifted, or a random gust of air had knocked something over. But the tapping didn't stop. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My room was pitch black, but the faint glow of my laptop screen illuminated the toy just enough for me to see it. Midnight Buddy was still sitting exactly where I'd left it, completely still. The tapping stopped the second I moved. Great, I muttered to myself. Now I'm scaring myself over a stupid toy. I got up, turned on the lights, and walked over to my desk. Everything looked normal. Midnight Buddy was exactly the same as before, its creepy little eyes reflecting the light in that unsettling way. I picked it up, half expecting it to feel warm or sticky or something gross, but it was just cold plastic. I put it back down, turned off the lights, and went back to bed. This time, I didn't sleep so easily. The second night, the next morning, I woke up groggy and annoyed. Nothing else had happened after I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the tapping sound wasn't just my imagination. Still, I tried to go about my day like normal. I made some coffee, checked my emails, scrolled through Instagram for way too long, anything to distract myself from thinking about the toy. But as the day went on, I started noticing small things that didn't feel right. First, my desk chair was in a different position than I'd left it the night before. I'm the kind of person who pushes my chair all the way in when I'm done using it. It's a habit. But that morning, it was pulled out, like someone had been sitting there. Then, around noon, my phone started glitching. Random apps would open and close on their own, and my Spotify playlist kept skipping songs, stopping at random intervals. At one point, my phone froze completely, and when I finally managed to restart it, I noticed something I hadn't put there. A note in my Reminders app that just said, "Don't forget." That was it. Just those 2 words. No date, no context. I deleted it immediately, but the unease stuck with me all day. Midnight, again. By the time night rolled around, I was more annoyed than scared. I told myself everything was just in my head, fueled by too many Reddit horror stories and my own overactive imagination. But as midnight approached, I couldn't help but feel that same sense of dread creeping in. I decided to test the warning. What was the worst that could happen? Maybe it would give me a good laugh, and I'd finally be able to move on from this whole stupid thing. So, at exactly 12:01 a.m., I grabbed the Midnight Buddy toy from my desk and set it down in the middle of my living room. I stared at it for a moment, half expecting it to start moving or make a noise. Nothing happened. Feeling braver, I nudged it with my foot. Still nothing. Some curse, I muttered, laughing at myself. But just as I turned to walk back to my bedroom, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder this time, coming from the direction of the toy. I spun around, my heart racing, but the toy hadn't moved. It was still sitting exactly where I'd left it, its blank, glassy eyes staring up at me. The tapping grew louder. It was coming from all around me now, on the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. It sounded like dozens of fingers tapping in unison, surrounding me, closing in. My chest tightened, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The room was dead silent again, but the toy was no longer on the floor. It was sitting on my desk. I stood frozen in my living room, staring at my desk from across the apartment. My mind raced with excuses. Maybe I'd imagined leaving the toy in the living room. Maybe I was overtired and misremembered. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. I'd put it in the center of the rug. I knew I had. Now it was back on the desk, its creepy little glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. I didn't want to touch it again, not after what had just happened. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording a video, narrating every detail like one of those YouTubers who document haunted objects. "This is the Midnight Buddy toy," I whispered, zooming in on its blank face. "I swear, I left it on the floor, but now it's back on my desk." As I spoke, the phone screen flickered. Just once. A quick, almost imperceptible glitch. I told myself it was nothing, just my phone acting up again. But then the screen went black, and the phone powered off completely. When I tried to turn it back on, it wouldn't respond. My apartment was dead silent, except for my own breathing. I could feel the stillness pressing down on me, thick and suffocating, like the air was too heavy to move through. I glanced back at the toy. It hadn't moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The first message. I decided I needed a distraction. I booted up my laptop, hoping to drown out my nerves with some mindless YouTube videos. But as soon as the screen lit up, I saw something I hadn't put there. A new file on my desktop. It was a plain text document labeled HI. My stomach dropped. No one had access to my laptop. It wasn't synced to any other devices, and I hadn't downloaded anything shady. My hands were shaking as I opened the file. Inside, there was only one sentence. "Do you want to play?" I slammed the laptop shut so hard I nearly cracked the screen. My brain was scrambling to make sense of it. Maybe I'd been hacked. That had to be it, right? Someone from the dark web was messing with me, trolling me, because I was dumb enough to buy something from that cursed forum. But then I heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was softer this time, almost polite, like it was waiting for me to notice. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling anymore. It was coming from the desk, from the Midnight Buddy toy. I didn't want to move, didn't want to get any closer to it, but I had to. Slowly, I crossed the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached the desk. Up close, the toy looked the same as before. Pale plastic, tiny red jumpsuit, those lifeless glass eyes. But now there was something in its hands. A piece of paper. The game begins. The paper was tiny, folded into a neat little square. I didn't want to touch it, but what else could I do? I picked it up, unfolded it, and saw another handwritten message. "Follow the rules, or I'll come to you." Underneath the message, there was a list. "Keep Midnight Buddy in the room with you at all times. Do not leave the apartment. Do not try to throw Midnight Buddy away. Do not look away for too long. Do not open the door for anyone. Do not fall asleep. At the bottom, in smaller letters, it said, "Failure to follow the rules voids all responsibility." My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the paper. This had to be a prank. Someone had hacked my laptop, snuck into my apartment, and planted this whole thing just to scare me. But no matter how much I told myself that, it didn't make the dread go away. I grabbed the toy and shoved it back into its Ziploc bag, sealing it tight. Then I shoved the bag into a drawer, slammed it shut, and sat down on the couch. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. "It's just a toy. It's plastic. It's not real." But the rules on the paper kept replaying in my head, especially the last one. Do not fall asleep. The intruder. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted. I'd spent the last couple of hours doom scrolling on my phone, trying to distract myself. The toy was still in the drawer, and the apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. I couldn't even hear my neighbor upstairs, and usually he was stomping around all night. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, barely audible, like someone was tapping their knuckles against the door. My heart jumped into my throat. I glanced at the rules again. Do not open the door for anyone. The knock came again, louder this time, then again, and again. The rhythm was uneven, frantic, like whoever was out there was getting impatient. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer, just more knocking. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at the door. I didn't want to get any closer, but I couldn't just ignore it either. Slowly, I crept toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I finally reached it, I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway was dark, and the cheap overhead light outside my door was flickering as usual. But then something shifted. Someone was standing just outside the frame of the peephole. I could see the edge of a red sleeve and a pale hand resting against the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, my mind racing. That couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. I glanced back at the drawer where I'd stashed the toy, and for a split second, I considered opening it. But then the knocking stopped, and I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from inside the apartment. "Do you want to play?" The words echoed through my apartment like a whisper carried on cold air. "Do you want to play?" I froze, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But where could I go? The rules were clear. Do not leave the apartment. My eyes darted to the drawer where I'd locked the toy, but there was no way it could have spoken. It was plastic. It couldn't talk. Right? I backed away from the door, scanning the room for anything out of place. The silence was suffocating now, broken only by my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it again. "Do you want to play?" This time, the voice wasn't distant. It was closer. It came from the direction of my desk, the drawer. I didn't want to open the drawer. I didn't even want to look at it. But that voice, it was wrong. It sounded like a child, high-pitched and playful, but distorted, like an old cassette tape, warbling out of tune. I had to see if the toy was still there. Slowly, I approached the desk. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I reached out, gripping the handle of the drawer with trembling fingers, and pulled. The toy was gone. The Ziploc bag was still there, torn open down one side, like someone had ripped it apart. But the Midnight Buddy was missing. I slammed the drawer shut and spun around, scanning the room. My mind raced with explanations, but none of them made sense. Did I move it and forget? Did someone break in? But no, the door was still locked, and that voice hadn't come from the hallway. It had come from inside. The game begins. I started pacing, trying to think of what to do next. Call someone? But who? The cops? What would I even say? "Hi, officer. I think a cursed McDonald's toy is stalking me." Yeah, right. They'd have me committed on the spot. Then I noticed something on the wall. It was faint, like it had been scratched into the paint with a dull blade, but it was there. "Do you want to play?" My stomach dropped. That hadn't been there before. I ran my fingers over the letters, hoping they'd smudge or flake away, but they didn't. It was like the words had been etched directly into the wall. I stumbled back, and that's when I noticed something else. On the floor, right in the center of the room, was the Midnight Buddy toy. It was sitting upright, its tiny glass eyes reflecting the dim light. Its face was tilted slightly upward, like it was watching me. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't seen it. But there it was, inescapable and wrong. And it was holding something. The clock. In its tiny plastic hands was a pocket watch. It looked ancient, with a cracked glass cover and tarnished gold casing. The hands of the watch weren't ticking normally. Instead, they were spinning backward, fast and erratic, like they were counting down to something. I didn't want to touch it, but the watch was impossible to ignore. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt this gnawing sense of dread, like time itself was unraveling around me. And then I heard it again. "Do you want to play?" The voice was louder now, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the toy this time. It was all around me, echoing off the walls. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The words burrowed into my brain, looping over and over until I thought I might scream. I grabbed the toy, intending to throw it against the wall, but the second my hands touched it, everything went dark. The other side. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was standing in what looked like an old McDonald's play area, but it was wrong. The bright primary colors were faded and peeling, and the plastic slides and tunnels were cracked and warped. The air smelled like mildew and old grease, and it was empty. No kids, no parents, no cheerful employees. Just me, standing in the middle of this decaying nightmare version of a place I hadn't visited since I was a kid. The only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, flickering weakly. I turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out where I was. The play area stretched on forever, impossibly large, with no walls or exits in sight. And then I saw it. The Midnight Buddy toy was standing at the base of a slide, staring at me. But it wasn't a toy anymore. It was life-sized, at least 5 feet tall, with those same glassy eyes and a face that was just wrong. Its expression hadn't changed. It was still that blank, empty stare, but now it was so much worse. It raised one hand and pointed at something behind me. I turned, and my blood ran cold. The others lined up in the distance were more figures, their shapes blurry and indistinct, like they were shrouded in fog. But as they got closer, I could make them out. They were Happy Meal toys, or at least they had been. Some were giant versions of classic McDonald's mascots, like Grimace and the Hamburglar, but their faces were twisted and melted, their limbs elongated into grotesque shapes. Others were toys I didn't recognize, warped, unidentifiable things with too many eyes or mouths. They surrounded me in a loose circle, their footsteps eerily silent. The Midnight Buddy stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being dragged by invisible strings. Then it spoke, but this time it wasn't a question. You broke the rules. The clock strikes midnight. The pocket watch appeared in its hand again, spinning faster and faster. The toys around me started to move in unison, closing the circle. Their glassy eyes glinted in the flickering light, and I realized they weren't just toys. They were alive, and they were hungry. I tried to run, but the ground shifted beneath me, like I was sinking into quicksand. The air grew heavier, suffocating, as the Midnight Buddy loomed closer. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, mismatched teeth, and then everything went black again. I woke up on my living room floor, drenched in sweat. The toy was back on my desk, sitting perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. But the pocket watch was in my hand, its cracked face now completely blank. And scratched into the wall above my desk were 3 words: next time, listen. I didn't move for what felt like hours. My body was frozen on the floor, my eyes glued to the Midnight Buddy toy on my desk. It was as still as ever, its blank glass eyes catching the faint glow of my desk lamp. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. The pocket watch in my hand was ice cold, its surface rough and pitted. The cracked glass face was blank, no numbers, no hands, just a hollow void where time should have been. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. Finally, I forced myself to sit up. My apartment was eerily quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. The scratches on the wall above my desk, next time, listen, were still there, taunting me. I didn't even bother trying to wipe them away. They weren't going anywhere. The first message, I needed answers. I powered up my laptop again, half expecting another cryptic file to appear on my desktop. But this time, it was something worse. My email was open, and there was a new message in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. golden.archangel@hiddenmail.net. The subject line read, "It's not over." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. The email was short, just a single line of text. The game has started. Midnight is watching. Attached to the email was a video file. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I clicked on it. The video was grainy and low res, but I could tell it was filmed in my apartment. The camera panned slowly across my living room, capturing every detail. The couch, the coffee table, the desk, with my laptop still open. And then it stopped, focusing on me. I was lying on the floor, unconscious, clutching the pocket watch in my hand. The video ended with a single frame that burned itself into my brain. The Midnight Buddy toy, sitting on my chest, its glassy eyes staring straight into the camera. The rules shift. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled to my feet, my head spinning. None of this was possible. Someone had to be messing with me. But how? How could they have filmed me without me knowing? And worse, how could the toy have moved again? I grabbed the list of rules from my desk, desperate for something, anything that would make sense of this. But when I looked at the paper, the rules had changed. The original list was gone, replaced by new ones. Midnight Buddy must always face you. Do not leave the toy unattended. Do not look at the watch for too long. Do not trust the reflections. When the clock strikes midnight, don't breathe. At the bottom, in the same jagged handwriting, was a final note. Breaking the rules is not an option. Midnight is watching. The reflection, the toy hadn't moved since I'd woken up, but its presence felt heavier now, like it was taking up more space than it should. I decided to move it, just to prove to myself that I was still in control. I grabbed it off the desk and placed it on the bookshelf across the room, making sure it was facing away from me. As soon as I let go, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned back to the desk, and that's when I saw it. In the black screen of my laptop, there was a reflection. The Midnight Buddy was still on the desk. I whipped around, expecting to see it there, but the desk was empty. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned back to the laptop. The reflection was still there, clear as day. Midnight Buddy, sitting in its original spot, its face tilted slightly upward, like it was mocking me. The rules flashed in my mind. Do not trust the reflections. I reached out and slammed the laptop shut again, but it didn't help. I could still feel its presence, even though I couldn't see it. It was like the toy had burned itself into my brain, an imprint I couldn't erase. Midnight's arrival. The pocket watch started ticking, not spinning backward like before, but ticking normally, loud and steady, echoing through the silent apartment. I looked down and saw the hands had reappeared, both of them pointing straight up at 12. It was midnight. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest like a weight. The lights in my apartment flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The ticking grew louder, faster, until it was deafening, and then it stopped. Silence. I stood there in the dark, barely daring to breathe. The rules screamed in my head. When the clock strikes midnight, don't breathe. I clamped a hand over my mouth, holding my breath as my chest burned with panic. The darkness around me seemed to move, shifting and twisting, forming shapes that weren't entirely there. And then I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the blackness. They blinked in unison, watching me, surrounding me. And then came the voice, louder than ever. You broke the rules. Midnight's endgame. The eyes drew closer, and I realized they weren't floating in the dark. They were attached to something. A figure stepped forward, impossibly tall and thin, its face a hollow void that seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't the Midnight Buddy toy anymore. It was something else. Something worse. The pocket watch in my hand shattered, the glass splintering into my skin. Pain shot through me, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as the figure loomed over me, its hollow face splitting open to reveal a jagged, unnatural grin. You didn't listen, it said, its voice layered and distorted, as if 1,000 voices were speaking at once. Now you belong to us. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the Midnight Buddy toy, sitting at the figure's feet, its glassy eyes glinting with a malevolent light. The aftermath. I woke up in my apartment again, but something was wrong. The scratches on the wall were gone, the toy was gone, and the pocket watch was gone. Everything looked normal, too normal, like nothing had happened. But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. I saw the Midnight Buddy staring back at me, smiling, and it whispered, "Now it's your turn." I discovered a dark web link claiming to reveal what's really in Coca-Cola. The formula isn't what you think. Alright, so let me just preface this by saying I'm not one of those people who's obsessed with the dark web or conspiracy theories. I've got a pretty normal life. College student, part-time job, at a Starbucks, the usual grind. But like everyone else, I've got that little itch for curiosity, you know. The kind that makes you click on random YouTube videos at 2 a.m. about 10 unexplained mysteries, or scroll through Reddit threads full of creepy stories that you know are probably fake. That's where this started. It was a regular Tuesday night. My roommate, Kyle, was out doing whatever Kyle does, and I was procrastinating on writing a paper for my media studies class. I'd somehow ended up on YouTube, watching this guy who dives into weird conspiracy theories. The video was about the Coca-Cola formula, how it's supposedly one of the most guarded secrets in the world, locked up in some vault in Atlanta, Georgia, or whatever. Nothing groundbreaking, but it got me thinking, is that really the biggest secret about Coke? Like, what if there's more to it than just some trade secret nonsense? After that, I went down a rabbit hole. You know how it is. You start Googling dark secrets about Coca-Cola, and next thing you know, you're on forums with usernames like TruthSeeker99 and Big Soda Exposed. A lot of it was the usual stuff. Coke originally had cocaine in it. Duh. Or it's bad for your teeth. No kidding. But then I found a comment buried deep in a Reddit thread. It was simple. Just a random account that said, "If you want to know the real truth about Coca-Cola, go here. Link redacted." Now, I know what you're thinking. Clicking random links on the internet, especially ones that hint at the dark web, is like horror movie stupidity 101. But curiosity got the better of me. Besides, the comment had a bunch of upvotes and replies saying stuff like, "Holy crap, I wish I hadn't clicked this," or "This ruined Coke for me forever." So, against my better judgment, I copied the link into a Tor browser I downloaded once on a whim and hit enter. The page that loaded was weirdly normal at first, just plain white with black text in the center. It said, "What's in Coca-Cola? The real formula is hidden for a reason. Scroll down at your own risk." Underneath, there was a button that said, "Reveal the truth." I don't know why, but I hesitated. It wasn't like the page screamed, "Hacker trying to steal your bank info." If anything, it was boring. Still, something about it gave me chills. Maybe it was the silence in my apartment, or the fact that I felt like someone was watching me, even though I was completely alone. I hovered over the button for a few seconds before clicking. The screen went black. It stayed like that for a solid 5 seconds, and I thought I'd just fallen for a prank or some dumb rickroll. But then text started to appear, one line at a time, like someone was typing it live. "This is not what you think it is. The Coca-Cola company has spent billions to keep the truth hidden. The formula is not about taste. It's about control." That's when things started to get weird. Below the text, there was an image of a Coca-Cola can. Nothing unusual. Just your standard red and white branding. But then, as I watched, the image began to distort. It glitched, like when you're trying to stream something on bad Wi-Fi. The red started bleeding out of the can, spreading across the screen until the whole thing was this deep, pulsating crimson. And then the sound started. It was this low hum, like the kind you'd hear from an old refrigerator. But there was something off about it. It wasn't constant. It wavered, almost like it was breathing. I swear, I could feel it vibrating in my chest, like it was alive. A new message appeared on the screen. "Drink responsibly." It's not just a tagline. At this point, I was about ready to nope out, but before I could close the tab, another button popped up. "Continue." It was like the site knew I wasn't going to stop now. I clicked it. This time, the page loaded a video. It looked like grainy security footage of a factory. The the kind you'd see in some corporate training video from the 90s. The camera was aimed at a conveyor belt where rows of Coke bottles were being filled. But the longer I watched, the more I realized something was wrong. The liquid going into the bottles wasn't brown. It was this thick, dark red. At first, I thought it was just food coloring or something, but the texture was all wrong. It wasn't smooth. It looked almost clotted. I froze. My heart was racing, and I couldn't look away. Then the camera zoomed in on one of the bottles. The cap was being screwed on, but for a split second, you could see the liquid inside. There was something floating in it, something that looked disturbingly like an eye. I slammed my laptop shut. For a solid 5 minutes, I just sat there, breathing hard, trying to convince myself that it was some elaborate prank, maybe some edgy artist's viral marketing stunt. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd just seen was real. And that wasn't even the worst part. When I finally worked up the nerve to open my laptop again, the screen was already on. I could have sworn I'd shut it down, but there it was, glowing in the dark, like it had been waiting for me. And in the middle of the screen, there was a new message. You shouldn't have looked. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It just said, "How does it taste?" All right. So at this point, I was done. Like, actually done. My fight or flight instincts were screaming at me to shut everything down, throw my laptop out the window, and pretend this never happened. But the thing is, when something this weird happens, you don't just forget about it. It sticks with you. It follows you. That text, "How does it taste?" kept flashing on my phone screen like it was taunting me. The worst part, I didn't have anyone who could have sent it. I double-checked my contacts, my messages, everything. Nothing. Just this random number, and when I tried calling it back, it went straight to a generic, robotic voicemail. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Typical horror movie crap. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Someone probably found my number online, or maybe it was just a really well-coordinated prank, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let me shake it. That's when I noticed the Coke can on my desk. It had been sitting there all day, half empty, left over from lunch. Normally, I wouldn't have even thought twice about it. But after what I'd just seen online, the sight of it made my stomach churn. The bright red logo, the cheerful promise of open happiness. It all felt so fake, so wrong. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, examining it like it might suddenly start bleeding or something. It didn't. It was just a can of soda, right? I was about to throw it in the trash when my phone buzzed again. "Check your door." I froze. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a pretty average complex. Nothing fancy, but secure enough that random strangers couldn't just wander in. Still, the idea that someone was outside my door, someone who knew I was home, was enough to make my hand shake. I grabbed a kitchen knife, because obviously, and crept to the door. There wasn't a peephole, so I had to rely on the chain lock as I cracked it open just enough to peek outside. There was no one there, but there was a package. It was sitting right in the center of my doormat. A small plain cardboard box with no markings, no return address, nothing. Just my name scrawled across the top in black marker. I'm not proud to admit it, but I stood there for a solid minute, debating whether to just slam the door and pretend it didn't exist. But eventually, curiosity won out. I brought it inside. Opening it was like defusing a bomb. I half expected it to explode or something, but instead, there was just a bottle. A glass Coke bottle, old-fashioned, like the kind you'd find in those retro diner ads. It didn't look tampered with, no weird discoloration or floating objects, but the label wasn't right. Instead of the usual branding, it just said, batch number 0001, not for public distribution. I felt my stomach drop. Inside the box, there was a folded piece of paper. It smelled faintly of bleach, which, isn't normal. The handwriting was jagged, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry or couldn't hold their hand steady. It said, "This is your only warning. Do not drink it." That should have been enough to make me toss the whole thing in the trash. But the bottle, there was something about it, something that felt magnetic. It's hard to explain, but it was like the more I stared at it, the more I needed to know. What made it so special? Why send it to me? I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I went back to my laptop to try and figure out what the hell was going on. I searched the exact phrase, batch number 0001, not for public distribution, but nothing came up. Literally nothing. Like, not even one of those random, barely relevant results Google gives you when it doesn't know what you're talking about. That's when I decided to check Reddit again. I went back to the original thread where I'd found the link, hoping to find someone else who'd clicked it. But the thread was gone, like completely wiped. No user comments, no archive, nothing. Even the OP's account had been deleted. That's when the knocking started. It wasn't loud or frantic, just 3 soft, deliberate knocks, like whoever it was wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. My heart was in my throat as I approached the door, knife in hand again. I didn't open it this time. I just stood there, listening, waiting. After a few seconds, a voice called out. It was a man, but I couldn't tell if he was young or old. His tone was calm, almost friendly. "I know you have it," he said. I didn't respond. "You shouldn't have accepted the package," he continued, "but it's not too late. Leave it outside, and we'll forget this ever happened." I don't know what came over me, but I yelled back, "Who the hell are you?" There was silence. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd left, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You drank it, didn't you?" I hadn't. Not yet. But the way he said it, so confident, so certain, made me second-guess myself. Was it possible? Could I have blacked out or forgotten? My stomach twisted at the thought. When I didn't answer, the knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. I backed away, clutching the knife, and the sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. I waited, holding my breath, but the man didn't say anything else. After what felt like an eternity, I finally worked up the nerve to look through the blinds. The hallway outside my apartment was empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I left the Coke bottle sitting on my desk, untouched, while I sat on the couch, with every light in the apartment on. My phone buzzed a few times, more texts from the same unknown number, but I didn't dare read them. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? "Hi, someone sent me a creepy soda, and now they're stalking me." Yeah, right. So I waited. Morning came, and nothing happened. No knocks, no texts, nothing. By noon, I'd almost convinced myself it was over. That's when my laptop screen flickered to life on its own. There was a single message, displayed in bold white text against a black background. "Drink. It." I stared at the message on my screen, my chest tightening with every second that passed. Drink it. 2 words. Just 2 words, and yet they felt heavier than anything I'd ever read in my life. I could feel my palms sweating, my grip tightening on the knife I hadn't let go of since last night. It felt like whoever, or whatever, was behind this was watching me, right now. I checked the room, the corners, the vents. I even pulled back the curtains to check the parking lot outside. Nothing. Just my car, a couple of neighbors walking their dog, and the usual city noise in the background. But the feeling didn't go away. I closed the laptop and shoved it under the couch, like that would somehow make the message disappear. Then I turned back to the Coke bottle on my desk. It hadn't moved, of course, but it felt like it was staring at me, waiting. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the apartment, heading for the one place I knew would be busy enough to drown out the paranoia, the Starbucks I worked at. It was my day off, but nobody would think twice if I hung out there. Plus, it was comforting to be around people, baristas, students glued to their laptops, soccer moms yelling at their kids. Normal stuff. I walked in and ordered my usual, an iced coffee with caramel drizzle. As I waited for the drink, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see the guy from last night standing by the door. Or worse, the Coke bottle somehow sitting on a table, mocking me. But nothing happened. I found a corner seat near the window and tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe the guy at my door was just a prankster. Maybe the website was some kind of creepy marketing stunt. Maybe the bottle was just... My phone buzzed. I almost dropped it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to unlock the screen. It was another text from the same number. Running won't help. I froze. Slowly, I looked up from my phone, scanning the room. Everyone looked normal. Too normal. A woman was laughing with her friend by the counter. A guy in a hoodie was typing furiously on his laptop. A group of teenagers were taking selfies. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. My drink came, but I didn't touch it. My appetite was gone. I sat there, debating what to do next. Call someone? But who? The cops wouldn't take me seriously. My roommate, Kyle, wouldn't care. He'd just laugh and tell me to lay off the YouTube rabbit holes. That's when I noticed the guy in the hoodie. He'd been typing non-stop since I got there, but now he was just staring. Not at me, though. At the Coke bottle on the desk in front of him. I blinked. That couldn't be right. There's no way it was the same bottle. But the label, the old-fashioned glass, the faint smudges on the side, it was identical. He wasn't drinking it, just staring, his fingers twitching like he wanted to reach for it, but couldn't. I decided I needed to leave. Now I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. But as I passed the guy, he turned his head ever so slightly. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear to God, they weren't normal. They were too dark, too empty, like the pupils swallowed everything around them. "Don't drink it," he said softly. I froze. "What?" "The bottle," he whispered. "Don't open it. Don't even..." Before he could finish, his head snapped forward, like something invisible had yanked it. He grabbed at his throat, choking, his eyes bulging in terror. Nobody else seemed to notice. They just kept sipping their lattes, scrolling on their phones, chatting like nothing was happening. I backed away, horrified, as the guy collapsed onto the floor, convulsing. His Coke bottle tipped over, spilling its contents across the table. And that's when I saw it. The liquid wasn't red. It wasn't even close to the usual brown soda color. It was black, thick and syrupy, like oil, and it spread across the table in jagged, unnatural lines, almost like it was alive. And then the smell hit me, metallic, like blood, but with a sour undertone that made my stomach turn. I gagged, stumbling toward the door. Nobody else reacted. Not the baristas, not the teenagers, not the mom with the stroller. It was like I was the only one who could see it. I didn't stop running until I was back in my apartment, the door bolted behind me. My chest was heaving, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but all I could do was collapse onto the floor and stare at the Coke bottle still sitting on my desk. It was different now. The label, once pristine, was smeared with streaks of black, like whatever was in the guy's bottle had somehow transferred to mine. And the smell, it was faint, but it was there, creeping through the room like a warning. My laptop buzzed, even though I was pretty sure I'd left it off. The screen lit up with another message. You can't avoid it forever. That's when the room got cold. Not the kind of cold you feel when the AC's cranked up too high, but bone deep, suffocating. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the lights flickered. And then I heard it. The faint sound of liquid sloshing inside the Coke bottle, even though I hadn't touched it. Slowly, I got up and walked toward the desk, my legs trembling. The closer I got, the louder the sound became, like something was moving inside. When I finally reached it, I could see that the cap had loosened slightly. A thin stream of black liquid was leaking out, pooling on the desk. And in the middle of that pool, something was moving. Something small and pale, writhing like a worm. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, to leave, to burn the whole damn apartment if I had to. But before I could do anything, the phone buzzed again. Another text. This one wasn't from the unknown number. It was from my own number. Just one sip. My hands were trembling so hard I dropped the phone. The screen shattered, but the message was still there, glowing up at me like some sick joke. And then, as if on cue, the Coke bottle tipped over on its own, rolling to the edge of the desk. It landed upright, perfectly balanced, the cap popping off with a quiet hiss. The smell hit me full force, rotting metal and decay, and I realized I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't avoid it. I had to know. The bottle sat there on the floor, perfectly upright, the black liquid inside shifting like it had a mind of its own. It didn't fizz, didn't bubble. It just moved, slowly, methodically, like it was waiting for me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. Time felt warped, stretched thin. My thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, curiosity, and something darker, something that whispered, just drink it. Find out. That's when the knocking came back. It was louder this time, more forceful, like whoever was on the other side wasn't asking for permission anymore. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. My mind raced. Could it be the guy from Starbucks? Or maybe the man from last night? But when I peeked through the blinds, the hallway was empty. And yet, the knocking continued. I backed away from the door, my eyes flicking between it and the Coke bottle on the floor. My brain was screaming at me to call someone, anyone, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't something the cops could fix. Then the knocking stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. I held my breath, waiting for the next sound, and that's when I heard it. The voice. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the apartment. Why are you afraid? The voice was calm, almost soothing, like someone trying to lull a child to sleep. I spun around, clutching the knife, but the room was empty. The shadows seemed darker now, deeper, like they were watching me. Drink it, the voice said again. This time, It came from the bottle. I swear, I could see the liquid shifting, rippling in time with the words. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I backed away, but the smell, the sour metallic rot, was everywhere, making it hard to think, to breathe. Then the TV turned on. The screen flickered to life, static at first, then an image. It was the factory from the video I'd seen on the dark web. The conveyor belts, the bottles, the thick red liquid. Only now, the footage was clearer. I could see the workers, faceless figures in white lab coats and masks, pouring buckets of something into massive vats. The liquid churned and bubbled, a sickly black red that didn't look natural. The camera panned to a close-up of the vats, and my stomach turned. The liquid wasn't just liquid. There were pieces, bits of something organic, something that looked horribly, unmistakably human. I stumbled back, gagging, but the footage kept playing. The next shot was of the bottles being filled. The liquid sloshed inside, thick and viscous, and every so often, something floated to the surface. An eyeball, a finger, something too mangled to identify. My vision blurred as bile rose in my throat. And then the screen froze, the image locking onto a single frame, a hand pressed against the inside of a glass bottle, its fingers twisted and broken, its skin peeling away like it had been submerged for far too long. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing from the TV, the bottle, everywhere. This is the formula. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the room plunged into darkness. When they came back on, the Coke bottle was no longer on the floor. It was in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. My fingers were wrapped tightly around the glass, my knuckles white. The cap was gone, and the smell was stronger now. So strong, I could taste it in the back of my throat. I tried to drop it, to throw it across the room, but my hand wouldn't move. It was like the bottle had fused to my skin. The voice was relentless now, drilling into my mind, louder and louder. Drink it, drink it, drink it. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, the bottle tipping toward my lips. I fought it, every muscle in my body straining, but it was useless. The smell was overwhelming, the voice deafening. And then I heard something else, a sound beneath the voice, a low, guttural hum, like a swarm of insects buzzing just out of sight. It grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the bottle. It was coming from me. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I thought I might throw up, but instead, something rose in my throat, something thick and slimy, something that tasted like iron and decay. I coughed, gagged, and a thin stream of black liquid dribbled from my lips. It wasn't from the bottle. It was from inside me. I screamed, but the sound came out wrong, distorted, like it was being swallowed by the hum. The room spun, the walls warping and twisting, and the shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for me. The bottle tilted again, and this time, I couldn't stop it. The liquid poured out, thick and cold, sliding down my throat. The taste was indescribable. Bitter, metallic, rancid, like every horrible thing you could imagine mixed into one. I gagged, choking, but the bottle wouldn't stop pouring. It wasn't just liquid anymore. There were pieces, bits of flesh, hair, something that crunched between my teeth. And then it stopped. The bottle fell from my hand, shattering on the floor. I collapsed beside it, gasping for air, my vision swimming. My mouth burned, my throat raw, but the worst part was the cold. It was spreading through me, seeping into my veins, my bones, my mind. I looked down at my hands, and for a moment, I didn't recognize them. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and beneath it, I could see something moving, something dark, writhing like 1,000 tiny worms. The voice returned, softer now, almost gentle. "It's in you now." The TV turned off, the apartment falling silent, but the hum didn't go away. It was inside me, a constant vibrating presence that I couldn't escape. I staggered to my feet, clutching the edge of the desk for support. The world felt wrong, like I was seeing it through a distorted lens. I turned toward the shattered bottle on the floor, and for the first time, I noticed the label. The words were different now, scrawled in jagged, bleeding letters. Batch number 0002. Welcome to the family. The label was the final straw. Batch number 0002. Welcome to the family. Family. The word echoed in my head, louder and louder, until it drowned out everything else. I stumbled backward, clutching my chest, trying to breathe through the suffocating hum that had taken up residence inside me. The room didn't feel like my apartment anymore. The walls seemed to pulse, shifting and closing in like they were alive. Shadows crawled along the floor and ceiling, twisting into shapes I couldn't quite make out. Faces, hands, things that shouldn't exist. And then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I didn't even want to touch the damn thing, but it wouldn't stop vibrating. It felt heavier than it should when I finally picked it up, the screen glowing bright in the darkness. Another message from the same unknown number. "It's time to meet the family." The second I read it, my phone screen went black. The hum inside me grew louder, deeper, resonating through my entire body. I tried to turn the phone back on, but it wouldn't respond. Instead, the TV turned itself on again, filling the room with that same static lace footage of the factory. But this time, there was something new. The camera zoomed in on one of the conveyor belts where the bottles were being filled. The black liquid poured in, slow and deliberate, but the frame froze on a single bottle. It was mine, the one I'd just drunk from. The label was unmistakable, and the sight of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The camera panned upward, following the line of bottles to a figure standing in the shadows. It was hard to make out at first, just a tall, gaunt silhouette. But as the figure stepped into the light, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was me. Not a reflection, not a video from earlier. It was me, standing there in that factory, wearing the same clothes I had on now, my skin pale and stretched tight over my bones. My doppelganger stared directly into the camera, its lips curling into a slow, unnatural smile. "You've always been one of us," it said. I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no. This isn't real." But the screen didn't care what I believed. The doppelganger leaned closer, its dark, empty eyes boring into mine. "You drank it. You're part of the process now. Welcome home." The screen flickered, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then the image changed. The camera zoomed out, revealing rows and rows of figures standing in the factory. Each one held a Coke bottle, their faces blank, their eyes dead, and I recognized them. The guy from Starbucks, the man who knocked on my door, the faceless workers from the earlier footage, even some strangers I'd passed on the street without a second thought. They were all there, waiting, holding their bottles like sacred relics. And at the very front of the crowd was me. The screen went dark, but the room didn't return to normal. The shadows moved faster now, swirling like a storm, the hum so loud I thought my skull might crack. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't block it out. Then the shadows stopped, Everything went still. The hum faded, replaced by a single, deafening silence. I looked up, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I saw them. They were standing in the corner of the room. Dozens of them. The figures from the factory, their faces blank, their bodies stiff, like mannequins brought to life. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared, their Coke bottles glinting faintly in the dim light. And in the center of them all was the doppelganger. Mr. It stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, my mind trapped in some horrible waking nightmare. The doppelganger crouched in front of me, its head tilted slightly, examining me like I was some kind of experiment. "You felt it, didn't you?" it said. Its voice was soft, but there was something under it, something cold and mechanical. The change, the truth I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was filled with cement. "You've been drinking it your whole life," it continued. "But this was different. This was the original, the pure formula." Its hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with an iron grip. Its touch was ice cold, and I could feel the black liquid surging under its skin, pulsing in time with the hum inside me. "We're all part of the cycle now," it said, leaning closer until its face was inches from mine. "You'll understand soon." Before I could process what was happening, the shadows surged forward, swallowing the room in darkness. The last thing I saw was the doppelganger's face, splitting into a wide, jagged grin, its teeth black and gleaming. When I woke up, I was lying on my living room floor. The Coke bottle was gone. The TV was off. The room looked normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. The hum was still there, faint but constant, a reminder that something inside me had changed. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, trying to convince myself it was over. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw it. My reflection wasn't my own anymore. The eyes staring back at me were dark and empty, like two endless voids. And when I opened my mouth to scream, black liquid dripped from my lips, staining the sink. Now I understand. The formula isn't just a drink. It's a gateway, a process, a way to keep the cycle going. And I'm part of it now. If you see an old-fashioned Coke bottle with a strange label, don't open it. Don't even touch it. Because once you do, it doesn't let you go. And it's always watching.